Happy Tuesday, friends. Welcome to the InfoPorte Release 6.5 webinar. My name is Nicole Shevick, and I'm with Change Management and Training Development over in ITS. And I am joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Scott Jackson and Simon Burke of InfoPorte fame. So they're here to answer all of the questions I can't. So we're going to get started. I just want to tell you welcome. Glad you guys are joining us today. We're going to cover the changes that you see in InfoPorte as of yesterday with the 6.5 release. It'll take us about 60 minutes, maybe a little less. We'll see how many questions we have. When you have questions, you can go ahead and enter those in the chat window, and we're going to take those questions at the end when we're finished with the slides. And then after this ends today, you can go to Reporting tab on CC Info, and you can check out the webinar recording there, and send it to all your friends and family so they can watch it too. All right, so when we're finished today, you're going to be familiar with the changes in the Finance section, which include some improvements to the Transactions tab. InfoPorte cost codes are applied to soft encumbrances now, and when you apply an InfoPorte cost code to a soft encumbrance, that now displays on the Transactions tab. In addition, we realized that there was a problem with the sign on F&A budget transfers. That has been corrected. There are some enhancements to the InfoPorte cost code reporting via a new tab called IPT Cost Code. We have some updates to the SAS reports that you find in the financial reporting part of InfoPorte. With grants, there has been a change to hourly salary information on the Grant Details tab, and we'll talk about that so you know what you're looking at when you see that. On HR, several things happened on the HR, kind of small things you might not necessarily notice, but duplicate funding sources were eliminated primarily, and a couple of other things which we'll talk about. On the Faculty tab, it now displays departmental access based on, or routes based on your departmental access. So you're not seeing every single route on campus anymore when you're using the Faculty tab. And then finally, on the dashboard, there are now two new balances. There's a direct-only balance and an indirect balance, and we'll talk about that as well. And then I'll mention to you guys what's coming up with the BMS report, which I know everyone's waiting patiently for, and we'll be here soon. So today's focus, we're going to cover the Transactions tab, the InfoPorte Cost Code tab, and its sub-tabs. We're going to talk about the changes that you can see on the Financial Reporting tab. Again, detail that grant profile change and what you're seeing on the dashboard. So let's talk about the Transactions tab first. So now when you apply an InfoPorte cost code to a soft encumbrance, you can now see that on the Transactions tab. So we're looking at part of a screenshot from the Transactions tab, and you can tell that this is a soft encumbrance by looking at the ledger, because it's F&A, and in parentheses you see that soft encumbrance. You can also tell by the transaction type, which is soft encumbrance. And then finally, if you look to the right, when that cost code was added, that InfoPorte cost code was added to that soft encumbrance, this is where it will display if you're looking at the itemized transactions on the transactions screen. Just want to let you guys know about a change with the signs on F&A budget transfers. So the signs were actually not displaying properly on the transaction tab. So for example, these transactions here, which are negative now, were positive. And if you look at that transaction in Connect Carolina, it should have been a negative transaction. And so these that were negative before are positive now. Now, you may go, well, I didn't notice that, so how could that be? Well, that's because the total on the main ledgers tab was and continues to be correct. So there's different logic programmed on one tab versus on the other tab. And the logic was correct on the main ledgers tab, but was incorrect on the Transactions tab. So that has been corrected. So let's talk about the new InfoPorte Cost Code tab. We have a growing number of folks around campus who are using InfoPorte for cost coding. The more people learn about it, some people really like using it. There are a tremendous number of users in the School of Medicine, a lot of users in the college who use this. So this new tab shows a quick summary of budget and actuals for all of your InfoPorte cost codes. So So this replaces the cost code report that was in the SAS financial reporting screens. And you'll be glad that it's replacing it because you could only go one by one on that report, and this is far superior. So trust me, you're going to like this. This tab will let you drill down to see detailed balances and transactions. We're going to talk a little bit about that. One thing that you need to be aware of is that the IPT Cost Code tab only shows reports for cost codes that are created in InfoPorte. This is not for cost codes that you're using in cost code 1, 2, and 3 on Connect Carolina transactions. So you are just reporting on where you use an InfoPorte cost code in the InfoPorte cost code field, where you're tagging a transaction on the InfoPorte cost code field. So there are 4 new tabs below that InfoPorte cost code tab. The first one is the summary tab. So that lets you search for a specific cost code, or when you hit that page, it'll just have a list of all of the ones that you have access to. The roll-up tab gives you information by account, so you can look at that cost code and you can see exactly how much you spent on SPA salary, for example, or EPA salary, or travel. So it gives you account level information. And then the transactions tab gives you the detailed transaction that makes up the totals you see on the roll-up. And then finally there is the InfoPorte list tab, which lists the InfoPorte cost codes. And those are the cost codes that have been created in InfoPorte. And from this tab you can create new cost codes, or you can edit the ones that you have currently. And this is what that looks like. So you can see, working from left to right, the summary, the roll-up, the transactions, and the IPT list. Now, if you're on that summary page, I just want to point out that you can use a wildcard to search for your cost codes in the IPT cost code field. So for example, if you type in A and the % sign, it would pull back all of the cost codes that you have access to that begin with A. You could type in MED %, and it would pull back all of the cost codes that you have access to that begin with MED. So that's a really nice feature that I think you'll enjoy using. Do want to let you know about the drill down capability. This works very similar to what you have on the main ledgers tab and the OSR ledger tab in InfoPorte. So from the summary tab, from here you're seeing your detailed balances, and you can click anywhere on the line, so you can click on the cost code or the description, and by clicking here it's going to take you to the roll-up tab. And so you can see at the top of this we have the cost code here, right here at the top. And then here are some of the accounts on which there have been transactions for that cost code. And when you click anywhere on any of those links, it will take you to the transactions tab. So because we clicked specifically, in this case, on account number 522928, it takes us to the transactions tab and it gives us the transactions for that account number. So this will feel very familiar to you. This works very similar to the main ledgers tab and how that links to the transactions tab. It is important to be aware of one of the limitations that we have right now with this report. This has been identified. It will be addressed in a future release. But when you tag a transaction in InfoPorte, again, you're on the transaction screen and you're adding a cost code in the IPT cost code field. When you tag a transaction, you're allowed to use both cost codes created in InfoPorte and those created in Connect Carolina. But only the InfoPorte cost code will display on the IPT cost code tab. So let me give you an example so you can wrap your mind around what I'm saying. So for example, cost code MED0FIN8 is a Connect Carolina cost code. So you can see that cost code used in, I believe it's in cost code 1 on their reporting. You can tag a transaction in InfoPorte with this cost code, but you can't see it on the IPT cost code tab. So here we are on the transactions tab, and just pointing out to you, this is a screenshot from the main transactions tab. You can't tag transactions in IPT cost code. You're in the transactions tab of IPT cost code. You have to do that on that main transactions tab that you're used to using for everything, okay? So on that main tab, You add this cost code MED0FIN-AID, but when you get to the IPT Cost Code tab, you'll notice I did a search for this cost code and it returns 0 entries. And that's because this cost code was created in Connect Carolina and not in InfoPorte. So again, it's known that this is a shortcoming and it's going to be addressed so that if you can tag with it, you can report on it, which obviously we need to be able to do. And that is coming here soon in a future release. All right. So let's talk about the financial reporting tab, and just to remind you, this is the home to the SAS reports. You might often hear people use, oh, the SAS reports, the SAS reports. What they're talking about is the financial reporting tab in InfoPorte. So this tab is organized under 3 different buttons. So working from left to right, you have the ledger account, you have the cash balance, and you have the miscellaneous buttons. Now, most of you will see just the cash balance button, so you will not see those on the left and the right of cash balance. Ledger account and the miscellaneous buttons, those are available only to campus users who have enhanced access. And so that access was designated by their MOU leads. These are folks who also have some additional queries that are available to them in Connect Carolina. I think there's maybe 200 or so of those folks around campus. But if you don't see it, the reason why you don't see anything but cash balance is because you have not been designated by your MOU to have that additional access. All right, so let's take a look at this. So first of all, we'll just touch base on the miscellaneous button because there's the least amount happening there, so we'll cover that one first. So it has 2 reports, the Suspense Activity Report and the Transaction Finder Report. You may be familiar with both of those. Likely the Suspense Activity Report is something that you had used in the past. Those reports are now only available to the folks who do have that enhanced access. So if you use the Suspense Activity Report and you do not have that level of access, you can still get that information by going through the ledger, the main ledgers tab and the transactions tab. So you can still get to that information. You just have to do it in a different way now. So let's look at the ledger account button. So these reports, there used to be several reports on this tab back in February, and they were taken down because we basically, honestly, we needed to do some work on them. So we needed to validate the data, we needed to make sure they were reading the right tables, and let's say it, we needed to make sure they were right. So that's what we've done. And so there are 2 back, and there's 1 that's new. So one of the returning reports is the Ledger Group Drilldown Report, All Ledgers. It's a very long name. But there's a lot of good information in it, so it takes a long name for that. So we'll look at those updates in a second. There's a list of funds by purpose code report that has returned, but there are no changes to that report. And then finally, there is a source list report. This is a brand new report, and we're going to get into this one as well. So just to remind you what you're looking at when you look at the report in this part of the SAS reports, the financial reporting. These reports are all based on the commitment control ledgers. So, which is the main ledgers and the transaction tabs in InfoPorte are also based on the commitment control ledgers. So with using the same search criteria, you should be able to get your search results to match. But again, I just kind of want to caution you, we've got different types of filters on each of these pages. So you want to be really intentional about how you're using the filters if you're trying to tie the data back. Okay? So it will match, but you got to make sure your filters match. So let's talk first, give you some detail about the Ledger Group Drilldown Report and what you're going to see here. So this is a high-level summary of transactions by Ledger Group. So for example, I want to see how much money do we have on S&A? S&A is a ledger group, okay? State funds, ledger group. State expense and state revenue, those are 2 ledger groups. So it is organized by business unit, by ledger group. So again, you would have a line for state and a different line for state revenue. It is grouped by your fiscal year and by ledger. And so when we talk about ledger, we're saying how much money do we have in budget? How much do we have in pre-encumbrance, in encumbrance, in actuals? Those are the ledgers, okay? So this report does not have information for OSR or capital improvements because OSR and capital improvement projects have life-to-date budgets, and so this is based on an annual budget period, so it doesn't really work for OSR and capital improvements. The report has 3 tabs, and let's talk about each one. The first is the Ledger Group's Overview tab. The Ledger Group Summary tab is second, and then finally the Ledger Group Detail tab. And this is what they look like as you're going across the screen. It's important to notice that on these SAS reports, you often have more than just one report. So there's the information, the page you land on, but very often there are different ways to view that information embedded in the report, which is the case here. So let's look at the first tab, the Ledger Group's Overview tab. So this tab shows a total of budget, total pre-encumbrances, encumbrance, and actuals, and then the balance by the Ledger Group. And you can use your filters in any combination you want to use. So there's business unit, fiscal year, Ledger Group, department level, budget period, and accounting period. And you can use all of them, none of them. It just depends on how you want to look at your information. One thing I will mention to my friends out there who work in campus services and facility services who use the FAMO debt budget definition, you guys will need to make sure that you check the months, your monthly budget periods in the budget period. So right now, fiscal year 2015 is there by default, and budget period 2015 is checked by default. But you guys budget on a monthly basis. So you'll need to go in and check where it says like 2015 MO1, 2015 MO2 to grab your monthly budgets and to be able to return any values on FAMO debt and FAMO debt rev. And for those of you who are like, what on earth is she talking about? Just be glad you don't have to worry about it. So just for our campus services and facilities folks. On the Ledger Group Summary tab, so this shows a summary by fund group of all those transactions. So that overview says, hey, here's how much budget you have in F&A. Here's how much pre-encumbrances and encumbrances you have in F&A. But the Ledger Group Summary gets down and lets you know exactly, kind of in some more detail, by fund group what you have. So for example, if you're looking at, you would see 291 as a fund group. So if you had looked at trust funds, you'd have, let's say you had $500 million in trust funds. And then when you go to the Summary tab, you would see that broken out by 241, 291, 292, and so on. So the filters, when you drill down from the overview, the filters are applied to the Summary tab. You can change those filters in any combination that you want to. And those filters are the same as what we had on the previous tab. So I won't really get into these in any real detail, but they work the same. So you can get at the exact same information. The one thing I will just point out again is that as with the overview, if you have FAMO debt, you will need to make sure that you check the monthly budget periods. Now, UNC faculty physicians, you guys will also need to check on this tab. You would need to check the monthly budget periods as well. You don't on the previous tab because UNC Faculty Physicians is a trust fund, and so your totals get rolled up into the trust fund line on the overview tab. But to see it itemized on the Summary tab, you would need to check your monthly budget periods. So the Ledger Group Detail tab, that shows the individual transactions. So you're literally able to get down to the detail level of, where did these totals come from? So we got, $500 million in trust funds, where did that come from? And 250 of it is in unrestricted trust funds. Where did that come from and how's that been spent? That's what you can get to on this tab. As with the previous tab, the filters will be applied. So when you drill down from the Ledger Group Summary and the overview, they'll be applied here on the Ledger Group, or the Ledger Group Detail, excuse me. You can change your filters just as with the previous screens in any combination that you want to. Now, the way the drill down works here on these reports is you would start with, and we'll take this as an example, you're going to start on the Ledger Group's overview. So we're looking here at trust funds, and I can see my budget. In between here, I had to kind of cut it out for the screen. It's where I would see my pre-encumbrances, my encumbrances, and then I see my actuals and my FMS balance. and I just double-click anywhere on that line. And when I double-click on that line, it will take me to the Ledger Group Summary. So you can see that here. This is the Ledger Group Summary Report. And now it's broken out by fund group. So 241, 252, 282. I would see all the different trust fund groups where we are spending dollars, have budget, have brought in revenue, whatever the case may be. And again, just to remind you, what you have here in between are the pre-encumbrance and the encumbrance columns. So I can click on any line here, and in this case we're clicking on the line 241, so we're clicking on that fund group. And when I click on that line, it will take me to the Ledger Group Detail tab, and that's where I start to see the individual transactions that make up those totals. And here's where it's probably the most value to export to Excel would be on that Detail tab. I can export that to Excel. I can export the other tabs to Excel too, but probably the most value is doing that on the Detail tab. So let's talk about the source listing report. This is a new report, and this shows you source really at the highest level. So you're able to see exactly how much money you have and how much you've spent at the highest level. All right, so you can use any combination of filters on this report. There are ledger group, accounting period, budget period. There are details for you in the release notes. There is a source filter, which you don't see on this screen, but it's off here to the left, okay? And so use any combination that you need. If you look here, you can see that in this example, we had selected just the F&A ledger, and that's kind of what the little hint here is all about. If you don't choose a source, if you choose just the ledger, then you'll see all of the sources in that ledger, and often that seems what folks are kind of looking to do. So you can, again, use any combination of filters as much as you want or as little as you want, but if you want to go just by ledger group, you can see everything. So in this case, we selected F&A as the ledger group. That is actually the default. It's in there to help speed the reports up a little bit so that they're not trying to load all of your information every time you land on the page. And you can see here, these are the different sources that have been used in the F&A ledger. So 14101, 102, 103, and 104. Those are our suspense sources. Okay. So again, lots of filters. I'm just going to call your attention back here to the budget period for my folks in with FAMO debt and UNC faculty physicians. This is another case where you would want to use the monthly budget periods in order to get your most accurate balances. Oh, let me just point this out too while I'm thinking about it. There are several defaults that have been applied across these reports. They're noted here on the screen. They're also documented for you in the release notes. And this is just an effort to speed things up. But your business unit, you probably won't have to change your business unit unless you have access to foundations as well. So you may want to switch between UNCCH and CH Law, for example, if you were trying to look at the Law Foundation. That ledger group is going to default to F&A. Your fiscal year will default to the current fiscal year. Your accounting period defaults through December. So it's got July through December. So if you want to get year to date, you're going to have to go in and click the rest of the accounting periods. Okay, just want to make a note about those defaults. So let's look at the cash balance area. This is where if you have been given access to SAS reports in InfoPorte, you will see this tab. So I make that caveat because anyone on campus can see this, but they have to have been given access by their departments to the SAS reporting in InfoPorte. Okay, so you don't have to be a super user, but you have to be a user. So you have to have been given access. So the report that had notable changes in this edition of InfoPorte is the Comprehensive Financial Summary. By and large, the updates were designed to give us better reporting on our cash accounts. So it's really useful for folks who are looking for a beginning and an ending fund balance. So let your ears, if you deal with trust funds, let your ears sort of perk up here because this is really helpful for you. This is where you can go in. It's most similar to the old 18 screen that we had in FRS. So you can kind of go in and see really where you stand. I'll borrow a term from OSR, where you stand life to date for that trust fund, okay? So it's, again, just to remind you, auxiliaries and recharge centers are trust funds, okay? So there's been some confusion around campus about that, but they are considered trust funds in our model. This is great for looking at any type of trust fund, clinical trials. This could be really useful for looking at clinical trials and even some other contracts. It's not going to be as useful for state and F&A because state and F&A, they don't have beginning and ending fund balances. We just, we get our budget every year, and that's what we have to work with and to spend. So you're not going to find as much value using this for state and F&A. So this information all comes from the actuals ledger, and what that means to you is that if it is in this report, it has been posted. So you might see vouchers on the InfoPorte screens that have not been posted. Those would not be here because they're not posted. So that's what you're seeing in this report. There are 3 tabs here. You have the ledger actual source report with fund group summary, the same detail, and then you have a cash and investments tab in this report. So let's look at the first one. We're going to look at the ledger actual source report with fund group. And this is the summary tab. And the summary tab has 4 new columns. This is how it's changed from the version that you saw on Friday if you use this report. There are 4 new columns. The first one is equity adjustments. And this column shows any transfers that have happened on accounts that begin with 3. And those are fund balance accounts. Now, we're not supposed to be able to do that, and we can't anymore, but there was a little hiccup in Connect Carolina that allowed those transactions to be processed, and controls have been put in place now so that that won't happen again. It is very likely that you will look at every one of your sources and you'll never see an equity adjustment. Don't be worried. It's a good thing. But if you do, that's okay too. Now you have a way to report on it, but you won't be able to have any future transactions there. We now have the year-to-date total assets and liabilities column. So this is totaling all of your asset accounts, and those are accounts that begin with 1, and all of your liability accounts, accounts that begin with 2. So they're adding the 1s and the 2s. The amount that you see here, so in this example, this $61,062.96, that will match to the penny the amount that you see in the ending fund balance column, okay, which is this little green right here that's been cut off. That's that column. They're side by side on the report, and those amounts will match to the penny. It's due to the nature of our, how we have a balance. We have balancing accounts now with this accrual accounting system that we have. The third column that has been added is the claim on cash column. This column has all accounts that are 111,000 through 111,399 and 111,999. Okay, so the whole range through 111,000 through 399, and then the additional 111,999. So those are your claim on cash accounts. All your other cash accounts are, you guessed it, other cash. So there's a column, or excuse me, this is the column. There's a table in your release notes that were emailed out to you yesterday, but also further on in this webinar that'll show you what actually makes up that column. So we have some detail on that for you. So the last tab here is the second tab here is the ledger actual source report with fund group detail. And so, we had totals on the previous report. Now we want to see, now we want to see the individual transactions that make up those totals. And that's what's here. So it works the same as the previous report. You just have the detailed transactions. And then finally, the last tab on the comprehensive financial summary is the cash and investments tab. Now, you guys saw this before. It hasn't changed much, except there are 2 columns that have been replaced. Your investments column stays the same. This is just cash. This is just cash. Okay, so when you were looking at the first 2 screens, you could see cash, you could see all other assets, all liabilities, revenue, expense. All you see here is cash. Okay, so the first one, claim on cash, that replaced the column that was called cash current. Other cash has replaced the non-current cash column. And then finally, investments, it continues just as it was before. There haven't been any changes in this column. Now, let's talk about what's in the other cash column, because we mentioned what was in the the first cash, but this is what's in other cash. So here's your table. I'm not going to go through this. This is documented for you in your release notes, but you can see the account range on the left and then the type of account on the right. So it's very likely that you won't see any cash with capital improvements, for example. Unless you deal with capital improvements, you probably won't see that. So don't be surprised if you don't see all of these cash accounts, or, well, you won't see them itemized anyway, but they're totaled there. Okay, so detailed for you in your release notes. It's really important to be aware of how things are displayed in this report. So liability and revenue counts are both displayed with positive values. So what that means, it's fine on the screen. When you're looking at it, everything's fine. But when you export it to Excel, it can get a little bit confusing if you don't flip the sign on your expense transactions. You want to take those expense transactions and multiply those by -1 so that you can get a negative value. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So if you look at this report, your ending fund balance is $17,741.30. Good do. Now, I export all those details into Excel, and I create a pivot table. So now I look at my pivot table, and I see there's my beginning balance, all right, assets, liabilities, revenue, expense. I can tie every number there back to what I saw on the previous screen. But then I look at that grand total, and I might be tempted to think that that's my ending funding balance, but it is not. Okay, that's just a total of all of those lines. It actually doesn't really mean anything, so you can kind of disregard that total. But what you need to do is understand the math of how that ending fund balance, how that calculation is made. So here is how it works. So this is the equation that produces the ending fund balance. So you have your beginning balance plus revenue minus expense equals your ending fund balance. So here's how the math works. 24,962.23, so that was my beginning balance on this report. You can't see that, but trust me, it's there. I did the math. I looked at it. It's there. The revenue was $113,918.93, and then the expenses, I had to take those expenses and multiply that by -1. If I added all that together, all of a sudden I've got a lot more money than I really had. So my ending fund balance is $17,741.30, okay? And you can see that matches, this balance matches the balance on the screen, okay? So just something to be aware of. You're going to have to flip the signs on those negatives. Insert a column, set up a little formula to multiply it all by -1, paste it all the way down, and you'll be fine. Or just change the total on the expense when you're on your pivot table. Okay. Oh, and by the way, if I say that like it sounds easy, and you're like, that sounds easy, but I don't really know how to do that. Lynda.com, Lynda.com. We get free access as employees at the university, and they have little tutorials on how to do all of this stuff in Excel. So don't email me. Go to Lynda, Lynda.com. Okay, Grant Profile tab. So on the Grant Profile tab, you have the personnel details back on the bottom of that Grant Profile tab. There's been a change in the hourly salary calculation, so I want to make sure you understand how that's working. So salary for hourly employees is now calculated on an annual basis. So what they've done is they've taken the employee's hourly rate, so $15.68, and they've multiplied that by 2,088, or the number of hours in the year, in the fiscal year. And then that amount equals their total compensation. Well, you don't see total compensation on this screen, but it is taken into account in some of the calculations. One thing I want to just mention before I give you that other calculation, this year for FY15, we have 2,088 hours in the year. That number can vary a little bit depending on the fiscal year. So just know that that's not a hard and fast number. It'll change with each fiscal year. Now this total compensation is taken into account with the grant percentage column. So if you look here, you have your grant amount. That grant amount is divided by the total compensation, which is calculated up here. You can't see it on the screen, but that grant amount, the amount that the grant is paying, is divided by the total compensation, and then that would equal the grant percentage. Okay, so that's the percent in the grant column. That's how that calculation works. You might, if you didn't know about this, you might not even notice it. But if you're really paying attention to your hourly folks, you might notice now that the numbers are a lot more useful. So, especially if you've been kind of disregarding your hourly folks, saying this isn't really useful, now you can go back and take a look at it, and I think you'll find that it will help you as you manage those folks on your projects. On the HR tab, there were 3 problems with the HR payroll reports that have been corrected. So the first one, there were some cases where the reports were showing duplicate funding sources. Often this was from any type of change that had happened on an employee after October 1st, and for whatever reason it would duplicate those funding sources. That has been corrected. Secondly, there were positions where, there was a known incumbent in that position. They knew that somebody had, was there, but it was displaying none. And so this was being displayed on the position tab list and on the screen with the position details. It's been fixed in both places. And then finally, in some cases, comps for terminated hourly employees who had an active and an inactive position was being summed. So it was like being all added up together instead of detailed per the active and per the inactive position. That has also been resolved. So again, some things you might not notice right off the bat as you're in the system, but we want to make sure we had drew your attention to those. The new faculty tab, a lot of you guys are like, I don't even know what that is. What is the faculty tab? So by and large, HR folks tend to have the faculty tab. It's a tab that is used to help schools manage the appointments, promotion, and tenure process, often called the APT process. And so you can see this is what it looks like. If you have the faculty button, so the faculty icon, on the top right side of InfoPorte across, the menus across the top of the screen, if you have that faculty button, you would see this new faculty tab. And now when you go to submit a request for new faculty, you will only see request routes for departments that you have access to. And that's a good thing, because you can't route things for the college if you're in the School of Medicine, and you don't need to see all that gobbledygook. So it's been cleaned up now. So nice and clean for you guys. So let's finally touch on the dashboard. So the faculty dashboard now has 2 balances. So the first one is balance. Isn't that creative? And the second one is called balance direct only. And as you would imagine, the balance column includes directs. The balance direct only doesn't. And this is what it looks like on the dashboard. So if someone is looking at their project, they can see that balance and then the balance less indirects, which would be that balance direct only. So better information for your PIs, which I know is something that you folks who live in the world of contracts and grants, that's really, really important to you. So let's summarize what we've covered. So on the transaction screen, you can now see any soft encumbrances that you've added to, you can now see any InfoPorte cost codes that you've added to soft encumbrances on the transaction screen. The F&A budget transfer sign has been corrected so that the transaction is displaying properly. Cost code reporting has been greatly enhanced for those who do their cost coding in InfoPorte. You can see a quick summary of your budget and actual for any of your InfoPorte cost codes. Just do keep in mind that you can't see any reporting right now for Connect Carolina cost codes used in the IPT Cost Code field. This does replace the InfoPorte Cost Code report that used to be in the SAS reports, and you can drill down, much the way you drill down now from the main ledgers to the Transactions tab. The Financial Reporting tab, we have the Suspense Activity Report. That's that brand new report. These are for those folks who have the Enhanced Financial Reporting access. This is under that Ledger Account tab. We also have the Ledger Account reports. So we have the drill down report. You can see everything. It's basically a way to parse all of your data across your ledgers. The list of funds by purpose code is back. There haven't been any changes to that report. There is a third ledger account report, and that's the source list. So that's brand new, and that lets you kind of see source at the highest level. So you can see exactly where you stand budget to actuals at the highest level on a source. So that's been a much requested report and is now available. The comprehensive financial summary gives you some better information on your cash accounts, and again, you probably want to check your release notes for the detail on what falls into other, and also the other, now I can't think of the claim on cash. So which account numbers fall into claim on cash and which fall into other. That's on your release notes. The grants profile screen has the new method for calculating the hourly employees, again, also detailed in your release notes. If you haven't noticed, I suggest you print the release notes, or at the very least you know where they are online so you can go and check them out. Hourly, that information is calculated on an annual basis now, but do keep in mind the number of hours in a fiscal year will vary, okay? And that information impacts what you see in the grant percentage column on the personnel details, there on the grant details tab. So with HR, we had 3 problems that are corrected: the duplicate funding sources, the positions with known incumbents displaying none, and the report showing comp where they were basically combining active and inactive compensation, so incorrectly summing that. Those have all been corrected. On the faculty tab, you can now only see the routes for the departments to which you have access, and on the dashboard we have the 2 new balances, the balance and balance direct only, so knowing that the balance column is the column that includes the indirects. Do want to let you know about a very anticipated enhancement that's coming soon, and that's a change to the BMS report. So for those of you who may be new to the university, the BMS report, or Budget Management System, was a report that we used in the old EPA web to manage personnel budgets on state funds primarily. There is a BMS report in InfoPorte, but it does not have the converted data, so all of that payroll that happened in July, August, and September in our old systems has not been converted, so we don't have that in the InfoPorte report yet. Before the end of this fiscal year, Connect Carolina will have that converted information. And when it gets into Connect Carolina, you guys probably know this already, but if it's not in Connect Carolina, it doesn't exist in InfoPorte. So once it gets into Connect Carolina, then it will be displayed on the BMS report. So you'll have payroll actuals for the entire fiscal year from January 1 through the fiscal year. We will also have the retroactive payroll changes and the payroll projections on this report. So this is really going to be your best place for managing personnel budgets, personnel encumbrances, and monitoring payroll actuals. Okay, will be the BMS report. So it's coming, and I know you guys need it, and they know you need it, and they're working on getting that information into Connect Carolina so that it can be fed into InfoPorte, and this enhancement can be made for you guys. So always reference CC Info. That's an awesome website. Props to the fabulous Deborah Beller and her team for keeping that website clicking and popping. It never gets stale. There's something new on there all the time. And today, there's brand new information about the 6.5 release notes. There will soon be a recording of this webinar and also the PowerPoint. So if you'd rather go through the PowerPoint than watch the webinar, you can do that. So that information will be out there, if not this afternoon, in the morning. So thank you very much for tuning in, and if anyone has submitted any questions, we're happy to take those questions now.
Okay, the first question that we have is there a way to run an IPT Cost Code report by department number, or do I have to pull up each cost code account separately?
There is not a way to run it by department number.
Okay. Next question. How do we access the suspense report if we don't have enhanced access?
So you can get at that information by using a combination of the main ledgers tab and the transactions tab. So here's what I would suggest. I would go to the main ledgers tab. That's where you land by default when you click on the finance icon at the top of InfoPorte. You land on the main ledgers tab. In the ledger filter, I would put in F&A, and then I would hit search. And what that will pull back for you are all of the chart field strings where you have F&A dollars, okay? So, and again, it'll pull back a lot because it's based on your access. So if you have one department, that's what you'll see. If you have a whole school, you would see all of that. So you may or may not want to use department depending on how much access you have. But when you search F&A on the main ledgers tab, that will show you any places that you have suspense. So you want to look at the chart field strings across the top of each section, and you want to look for any sources that are 14102, 14103, and 14104. That tells you automatically that there is suspense. 14102, 14103, and 14104 are suspense sources. You'll also need to look at 14101. But when you look at 14101, what you're looking at specifically is the account number. So you want to look for account 511190. Account 511190. So if there are suspense transactions in 14101, they will have that account number, and that's how you can identify whether or not that's a good charge, that's payroll that should be there, because it would have account 512120, or suspense, payroll that shouldn't be there, account number 511190. And then you can drill down from that main ledgers tab either by clicking on the account or by clicking on the chart field string, and you can get to the detail of who is sitting in suspense. So that's kind of, or what transactions are in suspense. That's what I would do for now. Now, when you're on the transactions tab, if you are looking at 511190, you should see, if it's been corrected, you should see an offsetting expense. So you'd see the charges that went on, and then if you did a retro, you'd see the charges that came off. So if there's not, a charge moving it off, you would know that it's still an expense that needs to be moved. That's a lot of information. Sorry.
That is. Okay, next question. When will access be granted to the enhanced users? I have enhanced access, but cannot see the ledger or miscellaneous tabs in the financial reporting tab.
So you should put in a help ticket for that because the access should already be there.
Okay, next question. Currently, there is no way to process a correction for a single payment voucher. I was told that this was coming in a new InfoPorte release. Any updates on this?
I haven't the foggiest idea what you're talking about. Well, I mean a foggy idea, I guess I do. But you can't submit vouchers through InfoPorte. So that's you would be able to see it in InfoPorte, but someone gave you some misinformation. So that is something that would have to happen in Connect Carolina.
That's all the questions we have so far. Let me see if anyone has any more questions. By the way, your previous answer was responded by awesome. That was perfect.
Oh.
You also got a good job, Nicole.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Let me just see if anybody's writing a question at the moment. No. Give you one more chance.
Can you hear the crickets chirping? All right, I'm going to take that as a sign that the release notes that you have clearly printed, highlighted, made notations on were so awesome. You don't have any other questions. And I'll wish you guys a wonderful week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you with 6.6. Take care.